Hey guys, welcome back to this week's episode of Millennial Mirrors. We're back with Majid Al Qassimi.
Hey guys.
For the second part of the episode, a retrospect on season 1. And we're here to talk to you about the rest of the episodes. So if you haven't listened to part 1, go back and listen to it. And if you have, then you're all caught up. Hey guys, so this is episode 5. This isn't how they do it at Google with Alonaizy. Another person that you know.
Yes, I do.
Tell me, what do you think?
The episode was hilarious. I haven't laughed out loud so much, and only because I know you both, was it even more entertaining to see you guys go back and forth. And Omar's got an energy that unparalleled, and he's true to himself. I've met him in a number of different situations, and always the same. Always exciting.
So, what do you think about? Because there was a lot of discussion there about, for example, the gap between the education sector in the region and the private sector and how they don't really communicate. That was one of the main points we discussed. What are your thoughts on that?
So that's a real challenge for any country. Being able to sort of align education and the job space one-to-one and super quick isn't... I agree there are challenges, and you identified them, but if you're going to be able to get people to graduate and move into jobs that are exactly as described by the degree they get, and in fact that's something I've had an issue with, is that there's so many young people graduating with a degree, and when they're looking for a job, they're looking word for word. The degree matched the job description. And I personally believe quite the opposite. I'm a veterinarian, but I've worked in the zoo field as a veterinarian. I've worked in the conservation field as a veterinarian. I've worked administrative in conservation. I've worked administration in government, and I set up my own company to do agribusiness consulting. So I was taking a broader perspective. But you could just as well do marketing.
I graduated with a degree in marketing, and I haven't worked a day in marketing. I would just like to point that out. Okay? I worked in finance, I worked in strategy, I worked in all sorts of things. But
I think I think what maybe needs to be sort of clarified is that when you graduate with a degree, you're graduating with a skill set. Okay, a skill set that you can apply in various. If you're creative enough and you can show that you're capable of applying what you've learned to the job you're applying for, it can in certain markets be difficult. I mean, I don't know if somebody who's studied PR wants to become a pediatrician. That's going to work. But the idea is, if you've got a skill set and you are applying, if you demonstrate a capability to learn, a real curiosity, and a background knowledge, you don't just turn up to a job and be like, I want to do this. It sounds cool. But you are passionate about it. You read into the subject matter yourself. Sure, why not?
And what do you think about the current situation in terms of the private sector and the public sector not really being ready for the new generation that's kind of coming in and not kind of adapting or adjusting to what we want out of a job nowadays?
Well, I think it's funny, but it sounds like you're putting all the onus on the job to accommodate the oncoming...
Actually, I'm not, and I say this in the episode. I say that as someone going and getting a job, you have to have realistic expectations.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, you
of what that job shows. I get a lot of these, sorry to call them this, but kids who are 22, 23 years old, right, coming in and being coming in from another job, applying for jobs that I'm hiring for, and I'm like, why do you want to leave them? I just don't feel like I'm making a difference. I'm looking at their CV. I'm like, you graduated 6 months ago. Pray tell, what difference were you thinking you were going to make at this bank that's worth billions?
This was alluded to in the episode in terms of expectation, and I think we were talking. You and Omar were talking about the idea that this needs to be sort of part of the education system. What it means to join a company and a group of people that are working to a goal. How your part is part of a larger whole that makes an impact. One of my favorite stories, and I'm sure some people have heard this before, where a janitor was interviewed at NASA. And he says, what do you do? And he goes, well, I help put people on the moon. And the idea is he understands that he has a specific role and a purpose to ensure the rest of the machine, the company, if you will, works. And if you And I think that's part of this whole making impact on the grand scheme of things, and making impact immediately where you are. If you understand what you do day to day has a critical role, no matter how big or small, to the working of a company, and you excel in that, you will be making the larger impact together.
I also think a lot of people kind of, like you said, they either go and they look for a job title, or they go and they look for a salary.
Yeah.
And they don't kind of think about what environment works best for them. If you don't like being a tiny cog in a big machine, don't go work for a big machine. Go work for a smaller company. If you're the kind of person who doesn't like putting on multiple hats, a small company is not going to be for you, because they're going to expect you to put on double down and do lots of different things. You know what I mean? The startup scene is probably not for you if that's the case. So you need to kind of think a bit more about what you want, I think, in my opinion.
I think also exposure. So a lot of people are coming out of university and they just want the job straight off the bat. Now, we have the opportunity in our culture, and in certain ways, you can do internships, you can go and look for experiences and gauge whether the environment suits you or not. And I think that's a lot more important than getting hired, doing 6 months and going, okay, you know what, this isn't for me. Well, you've taken up the resources of the company. It is a challenge then to find somebody to replace short term, and you have to be able to respect that people are taking the time to make you part of the team. So I think in both ways, matching education and employment, as well as government, private. I mean, you mentioned, small companies. I don't know how many kids are coming out of, excuse the term kids, but how many people are coming out of, university going, I want to join a small company. Now everybody's looking at the big companies because they have reputation, they have, it looks good on your CV. Maybe they're enamored with the industry that they represent.
See, I did the complete opposite. My first job was in a startup. I was the fourth employee. It was a startup called the Abiyat Mega Store. They have stores now in Kuwait and Saudi and everywhere. And it was literally the CEO, the operations director, the CEO's assistant, her assistant, and then me.
So I'm curious now. Why did you pick the small company, the startup? What that over whoever else employs in the region?
It was honestly just because of the interview. I was interviewed directly by a CEO, and just kind of the conversation and the chemistry and what they were trying to build, and the vision for me was just so appealing that I thought, this is what I want to do. And to be quite honest, I have no regrets, because I got to put on so many different hats, and the experience I was getting and the work that I was getting to do, because it was a small company and they had no one else to do the work, so they had to give it to me. You know what I mean? Was stuff that my friends didn't get to do till way later in their careers. So that was kind of a really cool experience. I think.
It's interesting, because that really ties into what Omar was saying about you should have multiple curiosities. Now, whether you were curious about doing all that stuff, that experience was really important. I mean, it's rounded you out as a professional. When he said that, it struck with me, because I'm very much the same. I'm naturally curious about a lot of things, and when I sit across from somebody who's in the finance sector, or somebody who's doing stuff like messaging and marketing and PR, I naturally want to understand how their industry works, what their day job looks like, what they're providing in terms of value. And this multiple curiosities is important, because when you can cross-pollinate, you become a better, you essentially have a bigger toolkit, a nice sort of rounded skill set that no matter where you are, you can apply yourself. And I find, my mom, many years in PR, we all have this sort of ingrained, are you on message, that kind of what are you saying to your customers, what are your stakeholders saying. Those experiences all added up make you a stronger candidate. When you are going to interview, make you a stronger professional. And I think Omar embodies that, because I've seen him in so many different roles.
Exactly. And I think that multiple curiosities thing, and that trying out different things to find out what works for you, what doesn't work for you, is definitely one of those things that people should be trying to do more of.
The takeaway from his episode, I think, is really to be brave enough to try and quickly, through elimination, figure out what is your fit. Rather than, well, I've got this job now and I've got this salary, so I've got to hang out. Do the internship. Be curious about other industries. Knock doors. Cold call.
That's true.
And Umar's very
brave.
not only brave, but he gets down to the crux of the matter.
Yeah.
He's not worried about what people are going to say, at least from when I meet him. He's always very authentic, but he's always also very direct because he wants to get there. If it doesn't work, well, let's move to the next thing.
Right, true.
And I think that attitude would do a lot for younger graduates who are looking to find their place, their impact, their purpose.
No, very true. You heard it here first. You heard it from him. So go listen to the episode if you haven't already. That's Alonaizy, episode 5. This isn't how they do it at Google. So episode 6 is My Second Lambo Will Be Orange.
Lena had a really, really interesting episode because for me at least, she did something in the way she was speaking that the short answer from everybody is be selfish.
Yeah.
But she quite eloquently described it as, if I'm helping you, I'm helping myself.
By the way, this is about the definition of success and how to define success for yourself.
Yeah. So she was saying, if I'm helping you, I'm helping myself. And if I'm helping myself truly, then I'm helping you.
Yeah.
And the idea that if you want to help other people, you need to be able to help yourself first, because then you come from a place of strength.
That's true.
But if you're giving and giving and giving and you don't take care of yourself, you run out of batteries and you're exhausted and you feel there's some sort of exchange that it's not working. She really sort of quite clearly said, if you're true to yourself, if you're doing what you want, you will have all the energy for everybody else.
That's
and
true.
if you don't, it won't last. There won't be any sustainability in that activity.
And I think, the reason the episode is titled like that is because I think a lot of the places in the world, but especially in our region, like success has become so defined by material things and by how much money you're making. And now, again, going back to our previous conversation with all these, unicorn companies and all these like startups that are being sold for millions, etc. That's what people want to do, and because they want to like live that life. And I think having a discussion with Lena was very interesting because she talks about how it's more about finding your purpose and what's going to fulfill you, and then that will lead you to other things.
I think with a lot of the other speakers or people that you've interviewed, we're all sort of going around this topic in their own way.
Yeah.
And the importance there is being honest and self-aware of understanding where you're happy and what makes you happy, and also accepting that if you're happy, then it shouldn't matter what that looks like.
Yeah.
For me, a big thing, I reflect on this often, is, where am I happiest? I like being at home. I like the garden with my family there, and understanding that that's an important part of my happiness means I don't need to I don't need to be a Zuckerberg. I don't need to break out in this unicorn company. But I can still make an impact. I make an impact for my family. I make an impact for those around me. The people that I welcome into my home will also feel that impact. And so if people can understand, and it's not about scaling back your expectations, rather it's understanding where you uniquely find happiness, and you focus on that. You can be happy and successful, and success there measured in your own happiness very early in life, if you can identify it and focus on it.
No, that's very true, because I think, again, this idea of programming, right?
Yeah.
You're kind of, and it's not just by our culture, it's by media, it's by everything. You're kind of taught that you need to have this specific type of life. And it's very easy to get caught up on that, with that on social media. You're seeing all these people who are living their best lives, even though you're only seeing like these very short snippets of it. And you're thinking, I want that, right?
Yeah.
But I think if you're constantly chasing something, not knowing what makes you happy, you're a lot of the time going to be chasing the wrong thing.
Yeah.
That second Lambo is not necessarily what's going to bring you happy.
How sad would it be to get that second Lambo at whatever age, so many years piling into this effort, only to realize that when you have it, nothing changes.
Yeah.
Like the fulfillment isn't there. You turn around, you say, well, I spent so many years doing that. I think for young people, it's important to understand that if you can define or at least understand what happiness looks like, how it feels, success feels for you, there's no prescribed shape, and people can't tell you, oh, this is what it looks like here on this picture. This is what you. And I think what's happening is people see it as a means to an end. So they want to be happy, but they see the picture and they go, "Oh, this is how I'll get happy, or bring happiness into my life."
And that's the thing. Like, when working with clients and coaching them, again, on, especially if they're looking at what they want to do in terms of career, we always go back to like peak experiences when they were at their happiest, and then let's look at that story when you're at your most happy. What was important there? What made you happy? What kind of... And let's look at a few of these stories. And at no point, usually, in those stories, is it a material thing. It's usually connection with friends, or it's a sense of adventure, or it's accomplishment, or it's giving, or it's any of those things. And when you look at those versus looking at the material objects, and then you design around that, and you think about, okay, what could I be doing in my life that allows me to have that sense of adventure, or that sense of connection, or that sense of giving, whatever it is that's important to them. That's kind of how we go about kind of designing the life that makes them happier.
So you've got, people you're speaking to that are focusing on this for their happiness, and the emotional and the connection and the act of giving. Lena said, fear is an energy. Use it to propel yourself to move past your comfort zone. The idea is, okay, so you've identified this. Why aren't people going there more often? And they're sort of gauging themselves against the social media or the pictures, the Lambos, and they're going, okay, I'm happy here, but I seem to need to strive for this, or I'm identifying. Fear, is that holding people back when you speak?
Well, I think there's two things. I think there's the conflict, right? Because you might be happiest sitting in your garden. Okay, but the world is telling you should be out at the new hot club, taking a selfie and showing the world how you're a baller, right?
Keeping up with the Joneses.
Keeping up with the Joneses. So then there's this kind of miscommunication that's happening, and this mismessaging that's happening, and it's hard to sometimes just sit at home and do nothing if that's what makes you happy, when everything in the world is telling you should be out there keeping up with the Joneses. So that's kind of, I think, where one of the issues happens. And then the other issue is you have it's much easier to follow what everyone else is following rather than kind of trying to find your own path. Because if you follow what everyone else is following, if I go and I work in a bank and I try to do my best to climb that ladder, no one's going to come and fault me for trying that, even if it makes me miserable. But no one's gonna fault me for it, because that's kind of the status quo. But if I sit back and I'm like, what's gonna make me happy? Okay, this is what's gonna make me happy, and I'm trying to go in a completely different direction that doesn't necessarily make sense. And I'm constantly going to be faulted. If I do the slightest trip up, I'm afraid of what people are going to say. There's a lot of fear about kind of going about, following your dreams. At the end of the day, it does take a specific level of kind of bravery and to kind of get past that and leave your comfort zone to a certain extent.
I think the one thing that I've been fortunate in my life is that I've always had a good support for doing things that are maybe not expected or usual in terms of career choice, for instance. When I was studying to become a veterinarian, I was one of only 2 nationals from the country that was studying this. And more often than not, the question was, why are you studying this? تكون عند الهوش والبوش. You're going to be with the camels and the goats, and you're going to be out there doing what? I was aware of what the profession had because of my own experiences. And I always had the family support to say, no, if this is what you want to do, you can do that. Now, maybe not everybody has their family as that support sort of base, but there are friends, there are people that understand. Maybe it's a professor or a teacher who's in support of that. And when you know you've got that backing, and it's an educated and informed decision. Then I think you've got an opportunity to make a difference in your own life and to the society around you.
And I think you bring up a good point that it's not, your support is not always going to come from the most obvious place. Sometimes you have to go and find your tribe. Whether that's, if you're into music and you go, and you find people your rocking out in a specific community or whatever it is, go find your tribe, and that's where you'll find your support. That's where you'll find resources. That's where you're going to find information. That's where you're kind of going to get the best guidance on going where you need to kind of go.
I think the one thing there about finding your tribe is that it has to be an active process.
Yeah.
You can't sit on the hill and expect people to come to you to say, oh, we're here. I mean, you have to go and find those people.
Here's a quote from Lena, guys. Be very intentional in what role you play in your life and in the life of others.
Yeah,
I think that's a very
be
good
intentional.
Yeah. So that's the episode with Lena. I loved this episode.
Yeah,
I think
this
it was
was
a really cool one. So definitely give it a listen, guys, if you haven't already done so. So episode 7, guys, The Struggle is Real with Al Rashid. So this was an episode kind of that I really thought was important to do. It was about the idea of how we're so trained for instant gratification now that people aren't kind of willing to go through the journey and go through the struggle to get to where they want to go. As soon as they kind of face an obstacle, they're like, but I give up.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I know Talal.
Yeah.
I'm very impressed with what he does. When you first meet him, he's full of life, he's full of energy, and you think, wow, this guy is all over the place. He's so engaged. And then when you carefully consider what he does day to day, he's winning. He's ahead of many people I know because he does what he loves, and he does it without apologizing for it, which is amazing because in his story, which I thought was great, I love that all came out, where he's been, you know, when you think about investment banking and what he was doing before he got into sort of, you know, the whole restaurant culture, you'd think like, oh, you know, sharp suits and like big meetings and that's success. And he took what he experienced from that, he took what he loved, and he gave it everything. And the fact that, you know, even his story about, you know, waiting tables.
Yeah, he went back and he started waiting tables. And it was because, like, and for me, I was shocked when I.
He's very humble in that, and that's what I love about him. He's very authentic in that he said, "Look, I started from the ground up. I built what I love, and I give it everything." And you can see he's got energy for days when it comes to that.
That's very true. And it's like he has a quote. He's like, because I asked him, I'm like, "How did you, coming from Kuwait, how did you?" And he's like, "I've never considered society when I make any decision in my life." He's like, "That's a very weak place to make a decision from," and I'm like, "That's amazing."
That's a very brave thing to do. I mean, in our culture, especially where society plays a major role and that you exist within the society, very, very cool perspective, and it completely explains how he's got all this energy because he's like, if I am trying to make everybody else happy by what I do, there will be no place for me. In that sense.
That's very true. And at the end of the day, like everyone kind of sees his success now, but I love the fact that he took us through his whole kind of journey where he was like, I was an investment banker and I did this and I did that, and then I was like, nope, I don't want to do this anymore, and I went and I got a degree in hospitality, and then I came back, and he could have gone with his degree in hospitality and his investment banking background and worked as a manager in a hotel or something, and then he goes and he starts as a waiter in a restaurant and starts working his way up. It's just crazy.
I can attest to the importance of starting from the ground up. When I graduated, I went in as an assistant veterinarian. I believed also in working on the ground, in the field, getting your hands dirty, because I had my own ambitions, you know, to be able to do larger scale things. But you can't make educated decisions unless you understand what the people on the ground are dealing with. And, you know, with his work advising restaurants, he knows what waitstaff have to deal with. He knows what it takes to ensure that customers are satisfied. He's got real ground truthed experiences. I think the one thing that I took away was the whole idea of that fear or the things that we're afraid of are illusions. Essentially, they are mental constructs. And that these are barriers we put up for ourselves. You know, we may even be assuming so much that doesn't exist. And you go, oh, well, I can't do that because people will think X or Y, or people will be concerned about what I seem to look like in the society, or maybe my parents won't approve. Have you spoken to your parents? Have you told them this is important? Have you told them you want to try this? I think it's important to not make those assumptions and to be brave, perhaps, to have the conversations to remove that fear.
Yeah, I loved when he said, like, fear is an illusion.
Yeah.
That was, like, an amazing quote
Yeah.
from him. He also said this cool thing. He's like, because I asked him, like, how he deals with failure, because obviously he didn't
Sure.
just succeed all the time.
Yeah,
He failed.
yeah.
He's like, my perception of failure is the way I deal with failure. It's a state of mind. There is no failure.
Yeah.
And and the continuation of this, he was like, unless you die or you almost die, you didn't fail. You learned, and you're gonna move on.
Do you want to know something funny? That I had the same experience.
Yeah.
So when I was at vet school, there was a subject that I was having a really hard time with, and I was sort of building up into this mountain of I'm not going to be able to pass this exam. And I think it happened about midway through my education at university to getting my veterinary degree, where my whole mental attitude to doing my final exam was, well, nobody's standing outside the door with a gun.
Yeah.
If I fail, they shoot me. So in all reality, I can walk out of that and try again.
Yeah.
And that should be good enough to calm me down, and it did. I used to, sure, I was nervous, I wanted to do really well, but that crushing anxiety of failure, which can exist, was swept away because I realized so long as I'm alive and I can try again, I'm going to try as many times as I want. And yeah, it's, again, it just, that life experience, I cannot say how important it is to have that.
You have to pay your
mind.
dues, people.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean?
Those experiences, those failures, they are all there only to propel you forward.
Yeah.
And the law embodies that.
Very much so. And I think, like, the fear of failure, like you said, kind of connects to what Saad al-Madani was talking
Yes.
about, in the sense that we have this huge fear of failure and it stops us from doing things. But if you kind of get past that, then you're going to be able to do so much more.
There's this whole thinking about, like, fail and fail fast.
Yeah.
So close in on the challenge. If you fail, you learn something quickly and you move. If you're building up this large barrier between you and a possible failure, you end up slowing yourself down.
Yeah.
It's like you're running into some sort of cushion that's holding your progress back.
Yeah.
If you can remove that mental sort of buffer and go right to where you might fail and learn, well, you accelerate past everybody else in that sense. That's
Hell, with this podcast, I just put a random deadline of first week of Ramadan, I'm going to launch it. Come hell or high water. 3 months before.
You've done a sterling job.
And I was like, one way, because otherwise I'm just going to keep talking about it and never
Yes.
kind of like do it, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I was like, let me just do it. If it flops, it flops. If it doesn't, at least I've got a few good conversations out of it. And,
Absolutely.
And so be it, you know what I mean? So,
No, I think that's awesome. And I think with all the conversations you've had,
yeah.
I think you're seeing some common threads.
Yeah.
And failure, especially what it means in our culture, in our society, and how the youth, or anybody actually for that matter, never mind their age, but that are dealing with something they perceive as a possible failure, if they can remove the stigma, the mental sort of perspective on it, and just crush through that barrier, and boom, before you know it, you'll get new air in your lungs. Yeah. I can say it's very
because
liberating.
if you're not scared and you're not worried about what other people are saying,
sure.
and you don't consider society in your decision making and what they're going to say, then you're just going to go for it. You're going to go for your dream because it's not going to make a difference to you. So,
awesome.
So that was The Struggle is Real with Rashid. I love this episode, guys. And he's just so much fun to talk to.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
definitely check it out. So episode 8 is called Doing It for the Likes, and it was with Fatma Hassam, who is a 24-year-old social media influencer. This was a very interesting episode for me to do because I'd been out of social media for such a long time.
Yeah, I heard that.
I had deleted my Instagram and everything in 2014 and only started a couple months ago. And then also the age difference there to kind of talk to someone whose experience from university had been, social media. She had I didn't have Facebook till after I graduated university.
Yeah.
So there was a big kind of difference in the way we experience life completely, because I never had to deal with all these different things, and she not only deals with them, but it's her job. From the age of from university, she's being flown around and dealing with brands and contracts and all that. And that's just kind of a crazy situation, I think, to be in.
I think when you every generation has its sort of signature moments or experiences they grow up with, and whether you're fully engaged or not, they define us in a certain way. And so you're sitting across from somebody who, like I always think, my children will not grow up in a space where the phone was stuck to the wall.
Yeah.
You know, like you stood in a particular part of the house to use a phone.
Yeah.
What is that about? But I can understand also it can be a very sobering experience to be so young, to be engaged on social media, working, as you say, you know, you're being flown around, you're earning with that experience. And what struck me was actually quite openly, and in the beginning she said, I don't think people know much about me, because she's very particular about sharing only a certain part of her.
Yeah.
And that's also a very, she spoke about her dad and the challenges of then being able to get the consent, if you will, or the blessings of her parents for that. But the idea is, in a measured approach, she's made it work.
Yeah.
And I think that was quite admirable.
That for me was kind of a very important part, because I think a lot of people think, oh, okay, my parents would not approve of this, so I'm just not going to do it. They don't actually bother to sit down and have the conversation and talk about it. And she did. She sat down. She was like, this is what I'm going to be doing. This is what I want to do. Dad shared his concerns. Mom shared her concerns. And she took those on board, and they kind of came to a compromise, which I think is something that you need to kind of do. You need to be having those conversations either as a parent with your children or as a child, you know, or vice versa, because sometimes if you don't understand why your parents don't want you to do something, then you're just going to be resentful about it.
Yeah, I think
you know what I mean?
You have to appreciate where they're coming from.
Yeah.
Whether, again, one side or the other has to appreciate the other.
Yeah.
I think what I think maybe isn't as clear, but you've spoken about, is having the conversation.
Yeah.
Now that's, you're going to have to be brave, or sometimes you get dragged into that conversation whether you like it.
What are you doing with your life?
Or why is this happening? But to be able to be mature enough to say, look, I understand your concerns. This is this is the limit of what is being shared or what I'm doing, and it is for this reason. And if you can come to an understanding, I think there's an opportunity, rather than out of fear not even touch the subject. And I think that's really important.
I think also, like, realizing at the end of the day, your parents want you to be happy.
Yeah.
So if you just sit and actually have the conversation with them about what really matters to you and things like that, you're at least, if you decide to do it, regardless of whether they approve or not, at least they understand your reasons for it.
Yeah, exactly. Your motivations.
Even if you don't get their agreement, but at least let them know why you're doing something.
Yeah, I will say one thing. It's not. Sometimes it's not going to be one conversation. Like, you're not going to have one conversation that's going to be like, oh, we sorted that out. It could be multiple conversations. You could approach it again.
It could
and
take
again.
time for them to start, to process and understand what's going on.
And I think for a generation that's experiencing engagement globally in that way, or who knows what the next thing is, virtual reality or what have you. I sound so old saying that now. But, I think with my brothers, we talk about our children, about what they might experience in the future, what the future looks like. And there's an interesting game you can play, which is, make up a job that doesn't exist today, but might be something that a generation on would be doing. And then the conversation that goes around that,
Because realistically speaking, the jobs that are in the market right now, social media influencer being one of them, never existed when we were growing up, right? Because social media wasn't a thing when we were
well, in a way, that authority, if you will, or that attention, if you will, was all drawn to the superstars of the screen.
Yeah.
And there was no interaction.
Yeah.
So the Brad Pitts and Angelina Jolies of the cinema, and the generation of us cinema going regularly, going, they're a superstar. Now, you don't have to watch a movie, and there are people that are getting as much fame and engagement and hold that influence. I mean, that's where the term, I think, comes from, in the public's eye. So it's interesting for there are a lot of young people that have that kind of engagement, that fame. I worry to say fame, and it's not fame as just like, oh, she's famous, but there are people that really connect and identify with what they're seeing, whether it's, you know, modest fashion or otherwise.
Yeah.
The person engaging with them is got a message or a value that's shared.
And what about authenticity in the age of social media? What do you think about that?
That's critical.
Yeah.
If anything, I think social media and the whole idea of a perception of success has got us all very sensitized to when people are authentic or not authentic.
Yeah.
And we've seen a couple, if not many, people that have failed or have fallen in the eyes of the public as soon as they are either not authentic or their true colors show and something goes down.
Yeah, we both know what we're talking about.
I'm not going to comment, but it's just understand you can. I think authenticity is so critical because there's nothing worse than being perceived in one way, and then when you're met in public, people go, oh, well, they're very different. And you hear that a lot about like sort of movie stars that were like, oh, I love them on the screen, but like when I met this person, they were like in such a bad mood or whatever.
Also, sooner or later, you're not going to be able to keep up that facade. And again, your true colors are going to show. And then when people see them, they might not like what they see.
Yeah.
So yeah. But do you think social media has had a different effect on us in this region more so than other places in the world?
I think if you want to get down to the numbers, the kind of exposure or penetration of mobile phones, I mean, we're very tech savvy as a region. We love technology. We adopt it very fast. And with that comes all of the social media, the apps, and what have you. Yeah, it's molding our youth. It's molding our society in a certain way. There are people that are sharing some very valuable insights as to who we are. One thing that I always think about is in this region we have an oral history. You know, it was, you know, from mouth to ear, and that's how we told our history. And now not only are we documenting things in books, but there are people creating apps that will help you understand the lehja or the accents of certain areas or words that are not used. And I had a big laugh on the weekend with my grandmother who was using words, and she goes, "Oh, your generation doesn't know any of this." And I was like, I know somebody's got an app for that.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting because, I mean, even when I was talking to Fatima, she was saying it's different here because of the fact that you don't have that society of sharing. You don't have that society of, you know, being so open. And social media gave us the ability to do that in a safe way to a certain extent. Whereas, you know, kind of in Western societies, people tend to be just kind of open with their lives, and they kind of, at least in their social circles.
I think in comparatively, sure.
You know what I mean? Whereas here, it was one of those things where it was just never a thing, and especially when you've got like places like Saudi and stuff like that, it becomes a way to communicate in a way that you couldn't communicate otherwise. I think that's.
Sorry, I'm just remembering people who used to tell me stories about how that worked with Bluetooth. See, I wasn't even ever part of that, but people were like, "Oh, if you're in the cinema, switch on your Bluetooth." I was like, "Why?" And then like, oh, there are all these like contacts that start chatting with you. And I don't, well, where there's a will and there's a means, there will be a way. I think what social media has done is sort of democratized communication. It's sort of laid it out open, and everybody can engage, and in their, you know, at their discretion of how much. Safe. I think if you're switched on to your privacy settings and understanding how much you want to share. Some people will go in not knowing and then just be sharing everything, and then they don't realize, oh, what do you mean the whole world can see this?
Note to self, check your privacy settings. Exactly. So that was our episode on authenticity in the age of social media with Fatima Hassam. She shared her personal stories, guys, so if you want to know a bit more about how she became a social media influencer and all that, you can definitely hear that on the episode. So now we're on episode 9 with Dr. Naif Mtalla, and this is about mental health and how important it is. This was a really cool episode for me because, I mean, I was fanboying so hard because A, he's the creator of the 99, and B, he's just done so much for mental health in the region, so I just kind of like was so kind of excited to have him on as a guest.
He was very well spoken, and I thought it was really exciting to have this as part of your season 1. Mental health, I think, is it's scary for people that don't understand it, people that want to approach it but don't know how. I think it was also important. It was nice to hear that he had experience not only in Kuwait but in the UAE and also his experience in the US. For me, I think this is so important for our tolerance as a society of understanding differences that sometimes might not be obvious as to why. And he spoke very well about just the idea that, there are good reasons perhaps for things like mental health, but more so, for me, I thought was critical is that people understand that if somebody does have some sort of challenge, that they have to be willing to make the change.
Yeah.
And you can see, a lot of people thinking, well, if they have a problem, I need to help them. And they pour themselves into that person. But if the person themselves, doesn't recognize or doesn't understand that and isn't willing to make the effort, then all your effort could be for naught, and that would be very sad. So if anything, I hope the episode and Dr. Naif's work shed some light on the importance of awareness and engagement on the matter.
I think also for me, the reason why it was so important for me to do this episode was because I feel like there is still kind of a stigma around mental health and like going to see a psychologist or a counselor or a psychiatrist, whatever your needs may be. And that's why it was important for me to do it, and that's why I said at the beginning of the episode that I've been seeing a psychologist for 3 years, and I love it. And just like I see a physiotherapist because my shoulder pops out. You know what I mean?
It's interesting you put it in that perspective. It is so. We have medical tourism. Everybody goes somewhere to be checked on and make sure their physical health is. But one of the largest parts of our body is our mind, our brain, and the idea that has not only a major influence on our body. I mean, everybody knows what your shoulders feel like when you're stressed, and what anxiety can play out in the body. I know that from when I was doing my exams. I used to have a very clear cycle of anxiety build-up, sort of tension. Then I do the exam, and then I get this drop, and then suddenly my back's sore. And if we can bring mental health into that realm and make it something that people can openly and without any stigma talk about.
Yeah, exactly.
And do proactively. Because it's not that, I think the problem is when people say, I'm going to see a psychiatrist, people go, well, then you must be broken.
Yeah,
there must be something wrong with you in the head. Quite the opposite. I think if you're keeping your anxiety in check, if you're understanding triggers and being able to manage those, you're being proactive. I think that's very smart.
That's the thing, because I mean, like for me, I think it's one of those things where everyone kind of thinks if you're going to see a mental health specialist, whatever they may be, then there has to be like this huge catastrophic issue. Exactly, and that might be the case. You might be schizophrenic. You might have these issues, and you might need help. But there are also other reasons to go, whether it's marriage counseling if you're having an issue in your relationship, or whether it's your anxiety levels are out of whack, or whatever it is. It's not that big of a deal, and you can go for like just a quick checkup and leave. You can go for a long period of time. I go now like once a month, just to kind of just chill and talk.
I think the importance is there was one period where I went to go and see. They were coaches of sorts, but it was because of my challenge with learning. Again, I've failed enough exams getting to where I got to, and part of the anxiety and the challenge of dealing with that was kind of overwhelming. And I was then helped with some professionals who said, look, part of this anxiety is coming from these places, and also here are some tools to help you get by it. And that was, nobody's ever, up until then, nobody'd ever at school or otherwise come and say, if you can't remember things, here are some very well practiced tools. And I was like, you guys do this? And I think honestly, it would do a lot of people a lot of good to go in and to be able to at least see how much they can benefit from, even if it's just, under confidential sort of agreement, to be able to just speak from the deepest part of their concerns and their stress and their anxiety. and feel how alleviated you are then to be able to do that if they feel they don't have somebody at home or somebody close that they can do that with.
Exactly. And like you said, to give you the tools to deal with them and to and know how to deal with your issues or your triggers or even know what your triggers are. Sometimes you have no idea why you're stressed.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it takes someone from completely outside of your life to give you that perspective to be like, do you think this might be? And you're like, huh.
Yeah, it's I think the importance is part of what dealing with mental health, and then there are so many sort of aspects of that, whether it's something to do with the way your chemistry, physiology brain chemistry is working, or whether it's simply a trigger that's just not switching your adrenals off and your anxiety is through the roof and that's affecting everything else, or something that you just haven't vocalized. And I've more than once been asked something by a random person or a friend, and as soon as I uttered this one sentence, it was real, and suddenly the anxiety drops away, and you go, oh, that's what I've been worried about.
There you go.
And if there are professionals that can help you with that, professionals who can guide you safely through that, well, I think all the more power to people who are proactively going to find that kind of help.
Yeah, and I think don't build it up and make it this huge deal in your head. Like I said, just like you go see a physio if you hurt your, if you injure yourself, or just like you go see a doctor if you've got a flu.
Yeah.
I mean, why not go see someone for any kind of, just as a mental health checkup even.
So I wanted to ask, as you're a coach, how does that work with having spoken to Dr. Naif and what you do?
So generally, you've got like psychologists and psychiatrists, which are kind of medically trained, and B, they kind of go back and work with you on any kind of issues that you might have, and kind of
sort of medically related or otherwise.
But it's more about like and going back and kind of dealing with past issues and past traumas, and kind of like untangling that and giving you the tools and understanding of how to deal with those things. And sometimes, like you said, if you need if you need medical attention and stuff like that, that's why you would go to a psychiatrist. Coaching is much more of taking you from where you're presently at to where you want to get to in the future. So it's more about working with you as you are in this moment and seeing where you want to go and working with you and giving you the tools necessary to get there. Rather than it is about kind of going back and dealing with what issues you might have had in the past or what triggers you might have had in the past and things like that. So there's the easiest way to kind of explain
it's very clear, sort of past and future. And for me, when I hear coach, I mean, I think the first thing everybody thinks of is like a sports coach kind of thing. But in very much the same way, I used to play rugby, I used to play basketball, and the coach at the time there was trying to get the best out of me. Yeah. And I think that's always how I make the connection with coaching that you do, is how can I get this person in front of me to become the best of themselves. Exactly. And to give them the tools and the guidance. And it's not guidance through just experience or your own experience, but to say, to ask the questions, to say what is important here, and let's focus on that, because that will get you to be a happier and more fulfilled person. Yeah, and you can have a coach and a psychologist or a psychiatrist, and they work on very, very different things, you know what I mean? And sometimes they partner up together. It's not necessarily either or a situation, but like you said, for me, my work is about taking someone who wants to do something and getting the best out of them and getting them there. Yeah. It's not necessarily about going back and like talking about your childhood and what's going on there and what happened, and that's not kind of the work we do. It's a bit different. There was one thing that I loved where the quote is, "Why are you complaining? Why don't you become part of the people who changes that culture?" There's a lot to be said about not being happy with the way things are, whether it's in the culture or your workspace or what have you, and to complain. And complaining is easy. Complaining, you just open your mouth and you just... Exactly. You know who you are. We're all guilty of that in some respect. Yeah, that's true. But I recently thought about it as if there is something that you have a problem with, a challenge, something that you would like to address. Yeah. The difference between going directly to where that problem or challenge is and addressing it, and going and complaining, and you don't usually complain directly to the problem. You usually go away and you go, I don't like X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
I've sort of like recently changed in mindset where it feels like you're polluting, if you will. It's like, if you've got this piece of garbage, do you throw it in the bin, or do you just chuck it on the road or the side of the road? And I love that he's tackled it directly on, whether it's mental health or culture or anything.
Yeah.
We all can do a little bit more with being accountable for our complaining.
Yeah.
If I might be so bold as to suggest that to everybody watching or listening, I tried to keep that in check, and I've found that the more you can, and I've done some sort of conflict resolution between people at work in my previous jobs, where I've had both person come to me and complain.
Yeah.
And I was bold enough in the same day to call them both in and to say, guys, I want you to each have your 5 minutes to explain yourself. And as soon as I did that, they were like, oh, okay, that's where you're coming from.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it's easier to walk away and just tell everybody else how this isn't working for them.
Yeah.
And yeah, I was just happy that he brought it up.
I mean, I think he kind of he brought it up in a really nice way, and I think it kind of links everything together.
Sure.
Where it's one of those things where you need to take more accountability for your own life.
Absolutely.
You need to show up for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
No one's going to fight your battles for you.
No.
And at the end of the day, you're responsible for your own happiness. So you need to kind of take accountability for that. Don't just sit around and complain for endlessly, because that's not going to get you anywhere.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of the lessons that we've learned from kind of looking through all the different episodes.
No, I think one thing that I'd say about all the people you interviewed, all the guests here on Millennial Mirrors, is that they all showed that they take initiative and were accountable for their own actions.
Yeah.
And
Very true.
If there's one thing that I hope any of the listeners are going to take away, is that more accountability for your own actions, in that you can change your environment, your culture, your where you are and where you're going. Totally embrace that. Be brave enough to do something for yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
And you should reap the rewards.
Great. So that was episode 9, Mental Health Matters with Dr. Naif Mtawa. It's a super interesting episode,
Yeah, I
guys.
loved it.
So check it out. And he talks about kind of the difference also between psychologists and psychiatrists and where to go if you need what. So if you're interested in finding out more information, definitely give it a listen. Okay, Majid, thanks for being with me throughout this journey going back.
Thank you. This was so cool to be part of.
And this brings us to the close of season 1. Guys, it's over. We've done it.
Well done. I have to say, this has been a really cool season, and good for you for putting all this together. This was exciting.
It was fun. I actually really, really enjoyed it, and I hope you guys enjoyed it too. If there are any episodes you haven't listened to, go back and give them a listen.
Please go back.
And I'm going to be starting to work on season 2 after this, and thinking of topics, thinking of subjects and guests and all that kind of stuff. So if you guys have any ideas on who you want on the podcast or what topics you want us to talk about, send them in. My Instagram and my Twitter at Mshari Alonaizy. The links will be in the episode description. So yeah, that's it. Bye guys, and stay safe.
Bye-bye.